I was on the 34th floor when I saw her again. It had been almost 2 years since I walked out of Mercer & Voss without looking back. 2 years since I packed a single box, left my badge on the reception desk, and told myself that some chapters close themselves whether you're ready or not. I had built something new, small, real, mine. A consulting firm with 4 employees and a lease I could actually afford. I had coffee every morning at the same cafe on Lexington Avenue. I knew the barista's name. I could breathe without calculating every exhale. I was doing fine. I had convinced myself of that completely, down to the cellular level. And then the elevator doors on the 34th floor of the Crawford building opened, and there she was. Victoria Mercer, standing with her back to me, talking to someone from the Bryant Group's legal team. One hand on her phone, the other holding her blazer by the collar, hanging it over her shoulder like she owned not just the room, but the air inside it. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, just above the shoulder now. She was wearing dark trousers and a cream blouse, and she was laughing at something. Not the performance laugh I had heard in 100 boardrooms, but the other one. The quiet one, the one she only let out when she thought no one important was watching. I had heard that laugh exactly 4 times in 3 years of working for her. I knew it instantly. My hand went to the elevator button before my brain had a chance to veto the instinct, but the doors had already slid shut behind me. I was standing in the lobby, 6 feet from her, holding a folder I had no memory of gripping, and my heart was doing something completely unreasonable. She hadn't seen me yet. I stood very still and tried to remember how to look like a person who was not falling apart. I should explain what Victoria Mercer was to me and what she wasn't. She was my boss for 3 years, senior partner at one of the most respected financial consulting firms in New York, the kind of woman who walked into rooms and subtly rearranged their gravity without saying a word. She had built Mercer & Voss from a boutique operation into a firm that handled mid-market acquisitions across 4 states, and she had done it with the particular brand of controlled brilliance that makes other people feel simultaneously inspired and slightly terrified. I joined straight out of my MBA, 27 years old, sharp, hungry, and absolutely certain that working for someone like Victoria Mercer would either make me exceptional or break me in some instructive way. I had read every profile written about her. I knew her strategy before I walked through the door. What I didn't know was her. The profiles didn't mention that she kept a single photograph on her desk. Not a family photo, just a landscape, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, fog over water, and that she never explained it to anyone. The profiles didn't mention that she had a habit of standing at the window of the conference room for exactly 3 minutes before a high-stakes presentation, completely still, like she was running a calculation that had nothing to do with numbers. They didn't mention that she laughed differently when she thought no one important was watching. I noticed all of that in my first week. I told myself that noticing was part of the job. Understanding the person you work for is a professional skill. I was good at reading people. It was one of my best qualities. For 3 years, I was her senior analyst. I traveled with her to client sites in Chicago, Seattle, Houston. I sat across from her in airport lounges at 6 in the morning, both of us with coffee going cold because we were too deep in a model to remember to drink it. I wrote her presentations and she rewrote my conclusions, not because mine were wrong, but because she could always see 2 moves further into the argument than I could. I resented that for about 6 months. Then I started to understand it. Then I started to look forward to it. That specific feeling of watching her take what I had built and carry it somewhere I hadn't known to go. That, I also told myself, was admiration. A professional thing. A mentor-mentee thing. I told myself a lot of things. Victoria was not warm in the way most people mean when they use that word. She didn't ask about your weekend or remember your birthday. But she had a precision of attention that felt, somehow, more intimate than warmth. When she was listening to you, really listening, it was like being held in a beam of light you hadn't asked for and couldn't quite look away from. She would tilt her head slightly to the left. She would stop moving, and she would look at you with an expression that said, I see exactly what you mean, and also what you're not saying, and I'm deciding what to do with both. I got that look more than most people on the team. I knew because I tracked it. Not consciously, or maybe a little consciously. Our working relationship had lines, clear ones. Victoria was precise about professional distance in a way that felt almost architectural, like she had designed the structure of the relationship and would maintain it with the same discipline she applied to everything else. We didn't socialize outside work. We didn't text about anything other than deliverables. When we traveled together, the conversations in airports and hotel lobbies were substantive, interesting, occasionally surprising, but always tethered to the work. And then, in the middle of our 3rd year together, things began to change. It wasn't a single moment. It was a series of small shifts that I cataloged and filed under things I was probably imagining. She started pausing before ending our calls, like there was a sentence she was deciding not to finish. She started asking for my opinion on things that were outside my scope, not the models, but the people. What did I think of the Hartley Group's CFO? Did I think the client was being honest about the timeline or performing confidence? She started treating my answers like they mattered in a different way than they had before. Not as data, as judgment. One night in Seattle, we stayed in the hotel restaurant 2 hours past, when either of us had reason to still be there. I don't remember who stopped talking first when the server came to clear the table. I remember the look on her face when we finally stood to go, like she had just remembered something she wasn't supposed to forget. I filed that one under definitely imagining things. 3 weeks later, Victoria's firm merged with Voss Partners, the largest acquisition Mercer had ever absorbed. The structure changed. My position changed. And something in the way Victoria was with me changed. Not colder exactly, but more deliberate, like she was consciously adding distance where something had started to close. I told myself it was the merger stress. I lasted 4 more months. Then I left. I left because of a Tuesday. That sounds like a small reason, and it was, which is why it took me another 6 months to understand it properly. It was a Tuesday in November, 8:47 in the morning, and I was in the glassed-in conference room on the 34th floor, finishing the slide deck for the Okafor acquisition. Victoria walked in. She was on a call, phone against her shoulder, and she came to stand at the window behind me. Her 3-minute pre-meeting ritual, except the meeting wasn't for another hour. She wasn't doing the calculation. She was just standing there. I could see her reflection in the glass of my laptop screen. She was looking at me. Not at the presentation. Not at the street below. At me. When I turned around, she was already looking at her phone again. The call apparently finished, expression arranged back into its usual precision. She said, without looking up, "Slide 9 has a logic gap. The revenue projection assumes a growth rate the underlying data doesn't support." She was right. She was always right. I turned back to the laptop and fixed it. And I sat very still with the realization that my hands were not entirely steady. That was the first time I could not file what I was feeling under a label that made professional sense. I drove it underground instead. I became, if possible, even more technically rigorous. I worked longer hours. I made myself indispensable in a way that kept my position clear in my own mind. I was an analyst. She was my boss. The relationship had a name and a structure, and I was going to stay inside it. What I didn't account for was Seattle. It was 4 weeks after the Tuesday. We were on the 2nd day of a 3-day client engagement. The first day had gone wrong in a specific way. The client's internal team had sandbagged us with data they'd withheld in the preliminary meetings, and by the time we got back to the hotel, it was 10 p.m., and neither of us had eaten since noon. Victoria ordered room service to the small meeting room they'd given us for prep work. We sat at opposite ends of a table that was too long for 2 people, both of us laptops open, and we ate in silence that was somehow not uncomfortable. At some point she said, without looking up, "Why did you choose this?" I assumed she meant the career. I said something about market strategy, the analytical challenge, the scale of impact. She looked up. "That's what you say when people ask," she said. "I'm asking something different." I put my fork down. We talked for 2 hours. Not about the client, not about the firm, about what we had wanted when we were younger and how the shape of wanting changes as you get older, and what it costs to be the kind of person who doesn't compromise the version of themselves that matters. She talked about building Mercer, the early years, the fear, the particular loneliness of being the decision-maker in a room full of people who need you to be certain. She said something I still think about, that the hardest thing about clarity is that it makes the blurry parts of your life impossible to ignore. I didn't ask what blurry parts she meant. I knew somehow that she was not talking about the firm. We went back to our respective rooms at midnight. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed for a long time, looking at the wall, trying to locate what I was feeling inside a category I already had. I went through the list: gratitude, respect, connection, admiration. None of them fit the way my hands had felt on the table when she looked at me like she was actually asking. I flew home telling myself it was the fatigue, the pressure of a difficult client engagement, the kind of intimacy that happens between people who have been under stress together and will recalibrate back to normal as soon as the city absorbs them again. Normal never fully returned. For the next 3 weeks, I was in a constant state of low-grade disturbance that I had no word for. I noticed everything. The specific way her voice sounded when she was trying to be patient with a difficult client versus the way it sounded when she was genuinely at ease. The fraction of a second before she smiled. The delay that meant the smile was real. The way she always listened before she spoke, and how that habit of attention felt like a form of respect I had rarely encountered in anyone else. I noticed when she didn't notice me, and I noticed when she did, and I noticed what was different between the two, and I was exhausted by all of it. I told myself I was reading too much into a professional relationship that had evolved naturally into something collegial. I told myself this with great conviction. I almost believed it. And then, on a Thursday afternoon in January, she came to find me at my desk. She stood in the door of my office for a moment, which she had never done. Victoria moved with purpose. She did not linger. She was holding a file, but she didn't hand it to me. She said, "Are you happy here? Not are you satisfied. Not are you challenged. Are you happy?" I looked at her for what was probably 3 seconds and felt them stretch into something much longer. "I think so," I said. She looked at me with the tilted head expression. The one that meant, "I see what you mean, and I see what you're not saying." "Okay," she said, and handed me the file and left. I stared at the file for 15 minutes without opening it. 18 weeks later, I quit. I told everyone, including myself, that it was about opportunity. That I was ready to build something of my own. That 3 years was the right amount of time to have learned what I came to learn. All of that was true. The other truth was that I did not know what to do with what I was feeling when I was in the same room as Victoria Mercer, and I was afraid that if I stayed, I would eventually do something with it. Leaving felt like the responsible thing. Most days, the first year, I believed that. The thing about distance is that it should help. That is its entire function. You put space between yourself and a thing that is too close, and the perspective adjusts, and you begin to see it for what it was rather than what it felt like. That is what distance is for. For the first 6 months after I left Mercer & Voss, I was busy enough that it worked. I was building the firm, registering the LLC, finding clients, doing the unglamorous structural work of creating something from nothing. I was too tired to feel anything that wasn't immediate. There was a kind of relief in that. The dreams started around month 4. Nothing dramatic. Just the conference room, or the hotel table in Seattle, or the elevator on the 34th floor with the doors opening and her standing there. I would wake up with a specific weight in my chest that I had no name for, and I would lie there in the dark and tell myself it was just my brain organizing memory. Nothing more. By month 7, I had a client base and a team and a life that looked correct from the outside. A good apartment in Brooklyn. Friends I actually saw. A routine I had chosen rather than inherited from a job description. I went on a few dates. Women I met through friends or through apps. Perfectly good people who deserved someone whose attention was fully present. My attention was mostly present. Maybe 80%. The other 20% was doing something else, and I had learned not to examine it too carefully. I found her name in a newsletter in month 9. A profile about firms that had consolidated during the market shift. Mercer and Voss was mentioned. Victoria Mercer was mentioned. There was a photograph, a conference panel, her at the edge of a long table, one hand on a microphone, expression composed and slightly distant in the way photographs always caught her, because the photographs never got the laugh or the tilt of the head or the moment of actual listening. I closed the tab and made coffee and did not think about it for 3 days. On day 4, I opened the photo again. I closed it immediately and didn't open it again. This, I told myself, was progress. Month 11, a former colleague from Mercer sent me a message. She was gathering a group to celebrate the firm's new partnership announcement. A low-key dinner, just people from the old team who had stayed in touch. Victoria would not be there. She was traveling. I said yes, without hesitation, and spent the whole dinner talking about everything, except the one thing I was aware of, being aware of not talking about. On the way home, I sat in the back of a cab on the BQE and watched the Manhattan skyline over the water and had a conversation with myself that I had been postponing for months. The conversation went like this. You left because of how you felt when she was in the room. I know. That means something. I know. You have been managing it for almost a year instead of naming it. I know. Why? Because naming it means deciding what it means about me, and I'm not ready for that. The cab crossed the bridge. I looked at my phone. No new messages. I put it in my pocket. Okay, I said to myself, quietly, in the back of a cab, with the skyline behind me. Okay. It was not a resolution. It was just the beginning of not pretending I didn't know. I had been in love with Victoria Mercer since somewhere around month 18 of working for her. I didn't know exactly when. The feeling had not arrived. It had assembled, piece by piece, in the spaces between things I told myself I was imagining. By the time I left, it was built. Fully. The way a structure is built before the lights go on and you can finally see what it is. I sat with that for several weeks. I turned it over carefully, like something that had been in the dark for a long time, and might crack if brought into too much light at once. I examined it from different angles, what it meant about the years before, about the choices I had made, about the shape of the things I had wanted that never quite fit the lives I had tried to build. It made sense of a great many things. It also made leaving feel more correct, rather than less, which was its own specific kind of grief. I had not been wrong to go. I had been right, for the wrong reasons I had given myself, and the actual right reason was the one I had refused to name. I told one person, my closest friend Priya, over a bottle of wine on a Tuesday night in February, almost 14 months after I had walked out of the 34th floor. She sat quietly for a long moment. Then she said, I know. How long? I asked. Since the conference in Boston, she said. 2 years before you quit. You talked about her the entire flight home. I stared at her. You talked about the way she constructed an argument like you were describing a piece of music, Priya said, not unkindly. Ellie. I know. I put my wine down and looked at the ceiling for a while. I'm not going to do anything about it, I said. I know, Priya said again. She doesn't know. And if she did, it probably wouldn't matter. And even if it mattered, there's an entire world between who she is and where I am now. I know, Priya said, for the third time, and refilled my glass. I was right about all of it. And then the elevator opened on the 34th floor of the Crawford building, and Victoria Mercer was standing 6 feet away, and my hands were doing the same unreasonable thing they had done on the table in Seattle, and the 2 years of careful management I had built around the fact of what I felt collapsed in the space of a single exhale. She turned around. Her eyes found me before I could decide what to do with my face. For a half-second, something crossed her expression that I did not have a word for. Not surprise exactly. More like the way a person looks when they've been waiting for something and it arrives before they were ready. Then she said, in that specific voice, "Ellie." Just my name. The way she said it. That was all it took. But before we continue, if you made it this far, it's because this story touched something you already know. That feeling you spend years not naming, because naming it means having to decide what to do about it. Hit the like button right now. It helps me keep bringing stories like this one to you. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and turn on the bell. That way, YouTube tells you when a new story drops on this channel. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever left something? A job, a place, a person? Because staying would have meant admitting something you weren't ready to admit yet? What did it cost you? Type it for me. I read every single one. And tell me, what city are you watching from? I'll mark it with a heart. Now, let's go back to our story. We had coffee. That sounds ordinary. It was not ordinary. It was the most loaded 45 minutes I had experienced since the night in Seattle, and it happened at a small table by the window of a place on 52nd Street that Victoria chose, because she knew it would be quiet at 11 a.m. on a Thursday, which told me she had thought about where we would go before she had even said hello. She had suggested it in the lobby. She hadn't asked if I had time. She had said, "Come get coffee with me," in the tone that was not quite a request and not quite a command, and that I had spent 3 years learning to read correctly. I followed her. At the table, she ordered without looking at the menu, which she always did, and she set her phone face down, which she rarely did. She looked at me across the small table with an expression I had not seen on her before, or rather, I had seen its components individually, but not assembled this way. The attention, the stillness, and something underneath both of those that looked, from the outside, like effort, like she was working to be this honest. "You look well," she said. "So do you," I said, which was the understatement of the year. "The firm is going well?" "Yes. Better than I expected, actually." She nodded. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted, like the silence had something in it. She said, "I was told you were consulting for the Bryant Group. A small engagement, a few more weeks." "I know." A pause. "I'm on the Crawford building project. The Bryant Group is a subcontractor." I understood then that she had known I would be in that building today. Maybe not the exact floor or the exact moment, but she had known the geography of where our paths were likely to cross, and she had not avoided it. I kept my hands still on the table. "Victoria." "I'm not going to pretend," she said, which was so direct and so unlike anything she had ever said to me in 3 years of carefully constructed professional distance that I forgot whatever I had been about to follow her name with. She turned her coffee cup slightly. An almost imperceptible gesture. The kind she made when she was about to say something she had been deciding about for a long time. "The merger was a difficult period," she said. "The structural changes were necessary. Some of what I did during that time was—" A pause. She chose the word with precision. "Cowardly." I said nothing. I was listening the way she had always listened to me, fully, without planning my response. "You were the most capable person on my team," she said. "You were also—" Another pause. Longer. Something else. And I managed that very deliberately and very incorrectly. And I let you leave because it was easier than being honest about the fact that losing you was going to be a significant loss on every level. My heart was doing something I had no clinical term for. I'm not telling you this because I think I have a right to any kind of response, she said. I'm telling you because I spent 2 years being strategic about something that deserved to be said plainly, and I'm done being strategic about it. I looked at her. She was looking back at me with that full beam attention, and this time it was not for a presentation or a client call or a slide deck. It was just for me. Just for this table and this moment and whatever I was going to say next. You knew? I said. It was not a question. Yes. She didn't qualify it. Since when? She looked at the table for one moment, then back up. The flight home from Seattle. The flight home from Seattle. Before I had admitted it to myself. She had known before I knew. I sat with that for a long time. And you said nothing, I said. You were my employee, she said. And I was... She stopped, started again. I have not been, historically, very good at the parts of life that don't have a correct answer. I know how to make decisions under pressure. I know how to build things. I know how to lead. I am considerably less skilled at sitting in a room with someone I care about and not making it contingent on something I can manage. That was the most Victoria Mercer sentence she had ever said to me. I would have found it funny if my chest wasn't so full. You came back, I said. After 2 years, you let me walk out, and you didn't say anything, and then you came back. You were doing well, she said. You needed to do well, on your own terms, without... A brief pause. Without me complicating the clarity you needed. And now? She looked at me. Now I'm less willing to be strategic about things that matter. I thought about the cab ride over the bridge, the skyline, the conversation I had with myself that had started with okay. I thought about Priya saying I know before I'd even finished the sentence. I thought about 3 years of mornings with coffee going cold over financial models, and one night in Seattle that I had filed under, probably imagining things for the better part of 2 years. I thought about the feeling of the elevator doors opening. I said, You should have said something. Yes, she said simply. I should have. I was in love with you, I said. Past tense isn't quite accurate, but I know, she said. And I left because I didn't know what to do with it. I know. And you let me leave. Yes. A pause. And I'm asking you not to leave again. There it was, plainly, without architecture, without strategic framing or professional distance or 3-minute calculations at the window. Just, I'm asking you not to leave again. I looked at her. This woman who had been a beam of light I couldn't look away from for 3 years, who had kept a landscape photograph on her desk and never explained it to anyone, who had laughed a quiet, real laugh exactly 4 times in my memory, and who was now sitting across from me with the effort visible on her face. And I understood something that had been assembling itself in the dark for a long time. There are costs to honesty, real ones. There are things that fall away when you stop being strategic about the parts of your life that matter. I already knew what mine were going to be. I had thought about them in the abstract, in the cab, naming the thing and then naming what the name meant. My professional reputation was now deeply intertwined with my independence from Victoria Mercer's world. Taking this anywhere would make some people who knew us both raise their eyebrows. It would complicate certain professional relationships. It would require me to walk back into a sphere of her life that I had spent 2 years deliberately leaving. None of that was small. I also sat with the weight of what was on the other side. I'm not the same person I was at Mercer, I said. I know, she said. Neither am I. I need that to be real. Not just It's real, she said. She was looking at me with the tilted head expression, the one that said, I see what you mean, and I see what you're not saying, and I'm deciding what to do with both. Only this time I understood what she was doing with it. I called Priya that evening. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she had been waiting. She was there, I said. A brief silence. Then, tell me. I told her everything. The lobby, the coffee, the way Victoria had said my name before she'd even had time to compose a professional expression. The sentence about not being strategic anymore. The sentence that was actually the one I had been sitting with all afternoon. I'm asking you not to leave again. When I finished, Priya was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to do? She asked. I looked out the window of my apartment. Brooklyn in the early evening, the light going gold and flat across the rooftops. I had built a whole life in this view. Clients who trusted me, a team that was becoming excellent, a version of myself I was genuinely proud of. I had earned the clarity she had apparently given me time to earn. I thought about what it would cost. It was going to cost something. I had been honest with myself about that for months, in the theoretical. Now it was real. Some people in our overlapping professional world would have opinions. The Bryant Group engagement would need to be managed carefully now. There was a firm I had been hoping to develop a relationship with, one of Mercer's long-standing partners, and that would become complicated. I would have to be more deliberate about how my reputation was constructed, because some people would look at the history and make assumptions, and assumptions in this industry have weight. I also knew, sitting in that apartment, that I had made exactly one decision in the last 2 years that I had never doubted. Naming it, in the back of the cab, with the skyline behind me. Okay. Everything else had been contingency management, distance management, precision-controlled life management, and I was done with that. I'm going to call her, I said to Priya. A pause, then warmly, okay. It's going to be complicated. Most things that are worth it are. The Bryant Group engagement, Ellie. Priya's voice was gentle. Stop building the contingency plan. Just call her. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after we hung up. Then I opened a new message. I wrote 3 drafts. The first was professional to the point of absurdity. The second was too much. The third was just, I've been thinking about the conversation. Are you free this week? I sent the third one. Her response came in 4 minutes, which, for Victoria Mercer, was the equivalent of turning around mid-stride. Thursday. Dinner. I'll send you the address. I put the phone down and looked at the ceiling. The days between then and Thursday were not easy. I had a client call on Tuesday that went sideways and required 3 hours of damage control, which was useful because it kept the noise in my head to a manageable volume. On Wednesday, I told my colleague Jade that there was a personal situation developing that might require some restructuring of how I appeared in certain professional contexts. Jade, who is perceptive in the specific way that people are when they have worked alongside you for 2 years, looked at me for a moment and said, Is this about a person? Yes, I said. Is it someone you worked with before? I looked at her. She looked at me. Take the Thursday afternoon off, she said. I'll manage the Marcus file. Thursday evening, Victoria opened the door of a restaurant in the West Village that I hadn't been to and immediately understood was exactly the right place. Small, unhurried, no one there from our world. She was wearing something dark and simple. She looked like herself, which sounds like nothing, but which, after a year of photographs and memories and distance, felt like finding water after an unreasonable amount of time in the desert. We sat across from each other and ordered without performing the order. At some point in the first hour, she said, I need to tell you something. I waited. When you left, I let you leave because I told myself it was the right thing. You needed to build something on your own terms, without my professional gravity making the ground uneven. That was true. A pause. It was also convenient. It let me be correct and avoidant at the same time, which is one of my less admirable skills. "I know," I said. "I'm working on it." "I know that too." She looked at me across the table. "You're different." "Good different or bad different?" "Clear," she said. "You were always sharp. Now you're clear." "It's not the same thing." I thought about the cab, the skyline. "Okay." "I've been working on it too," I said. We talked until the restaurant got quiet around us. Not about the merger, or the firms, or the strategies. We talked about what we wanted, about what we had learned, separately, in the time we had spent not saying any of this to each other. She talked about a particular kind of loneliness she had been living with for a long time. Not the ordinary loneliness of being alone, but the specific loneliness of being precisely understood only in the parts of yourself you had decided to make available. She said, "You were the first person in a long time who seemed to be looking at the actual thing." I knew what she meant. I also knew that what I was walking into was not going to be uncomplicated. The next morning, I emailed the Bryant Group's project coordinator to disclose a personal connection to an executive on the Crawford Building project, as professional ethics required. She was gracious about it. There were 2 meetings I recused myself from in the weeks that followed. One professional relationship cooled in the way I had anticipated. I was careful. I was deliberate. And I was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely present. Not 80%. Not the version of me that was managing the other 20. All of me. The night after our first real dinner, I walked home through the West Village because it wasn't cold, and I needed to feel the ground under my feet. The city was doing what it does in late autumn, that particular quality of light that makes everything look like something worth remembering. I thought about Victoria saying clear like it was the word she had been looking for all along. I thought about what it had cost to get here. I thought about the 2 years of distance, the one long naming, the elevator doors opening, the coffee on 52nd Street, the third draft of the text message, the email to the Bryant Group, the professional relationship that had cooled. All of it was real. All of it had happened. All of it had cost something. And I was still standing, more than standing. I realized, walking home at 9:30 on a Thursday night in November, entirely myself. Not the version that had left. Not the version that had managed. Not the version that had packed a box and set a badge on a reception desk and told herself some chapters closed themselves. The version that had finally decided to be the one who opens the door. I have never been someone who believes that love fixes you. That's not what this is. What this is, learning that the bravest thing is not the grand gesture. It's the Tuesday in a cab when you stop pretending you don't know. It's the third draft of the message instead of the first. It's being willing to let the thing that matters be complicated rather than clean, real rather than managed, yours rather than safe. What love actually requires is the courage to stop being strategic about the parts of you that are already decided. I found that courage slowly, the way you find most important things. Not in a moment. In an accumulation of small, honest choices, made one at a time, in the direction of what was true. If this story stayed with you, write courage in the comments. That's how I know you made it to the end with me. And if you want to keep going, if you want more stories like this one, stories about the kind of love that costs something real and gives something realer back, the next one is already waiting for you on your screen. Take care of yourself. Until next time.